get this recorder started. The incorporation of America, we're talking about the change from the factory system to, from the farm system to the factory system. And it happened for a lot of reasons. And there was a lot of cost to this. There was a guy named Samuel Slater, and he didn't show up on your star materials or anything, but he's an interesting guy in history. Way back in the 1800s, back in about 1830, President Andrew Jackson called Samuel Slater the father of the American Industrial Revolution. In England, they called him Slater the Traitor. They didn't like him much. England had developed something called the arkwright system, or the spinning jenny, which was a textile mill that was powered by water. So it could produce fabric at a very rapid rate. And it was so effective that England cornered the market, and they were getting rich off of making fabric, off making textiles. This was so important to their economy that they made it a crime for anyone that worked in the textile industry to leave the country, because they were afraid that the secrets would break out and they'd lose control of the market. Well, Samuel Slater was a young man who worked in that factory, and he spent a couple of years going in, and he would stare at one part and memorize it, and at the end of the day he would go home and draw that part off. And the next day he'd go stare at another part, memorize it, and come draw it off. And when he finally had the system, had everything down, he snuck out of the country, came back to the United States, and started our own weaving system, and very quickly outdid England. That's kind of how our Industrial Revolution started. Well, we're going to look at industrialism in the Gilded Age, in this period roughly from 1865 to 1898. We're kind of in that era. And we're going to see how this increased the standard of living, but it had heavy costs on us, okay? Yes, we were producing better products, many times cheaper products, but there was still a very, very heavy cost. Causes of rapid industrialization. The first big cause was the steam revolution. The fact that we suddenly could use steam power to produce everything. The steam engine was originally invented to power factories. Now we're going to go through and we're going to put it on boats and have steam boats, and we're going to put it on trains and have steam engines. But we're going to have all of these things powered by steam at some point. The second big engine that drives rapid industrialization was the development of a railroad system, okay? Now, the U.S. was one of the very first nations to attach our railroad systems. We had these local railroads where, you had a railroad that went around Boston, and a railroad that went around Washington, and New York had their railroad. Well, we went through and we attached all these railroads and linked the country, and that's going to allow us to trade product on a much larger level. It's the first real big business in the United States. And think about how important railroads are. The jobs that they create. Somebody has to make those railroad tracks. Well, somebody had to cut down the trees to make the railroad ties. Somebody had to mine the iron and the coal in order to fire the iron and turn it into steel. Somebody had to build the train. Somebody had to drive the train. Somebody has to fix the train. Just the fact that we're building these railroads created hundreds of thousands of jobs. Now beyond that, think about the products that you can sell now. You no longer have to sell your product in places where they can get to you by horse and buggy. You can get it to a train, and you can sell your product anywhere in the country. We had the first catalog stores. Sears and Roebuck came around. Sears and Roebuck was a massive catalog store. Tell you how much things they used to sell. My wife's grandfather built his house in 1931, and he ordered it from the Sears and Roebuck catalog. He ordered the parts for his house. That's the way this system worked, okay? So rapid industrialization with the railroads. We couldn't have opened the West up without the railroads. You simply could not have gotten far enough out there. Think about how hard it would have been to get over the Rocky Mountains, how hard it was before you had trains. It was very time consuming and very dangerous. Well, trains just go through it. So this is probably the biggest factor, was this railroad economy. Other things that happened was the technological explosion that happened in the mid-1800s. We talked about the Bessemer process in the last lecture, but I want to make sure you know the Bessemer process. It is very important, and it always, always, always ends up on the STAR test somewhere, okay? The Bessemer process is simply a way of super-oxygenating iron to create a more powerful, cheaper steel. So the steel is more affordable and stronger, okay? You can't have our Industrial Revolution without it.
What did it do?
It creates steel that is more affordable and stronger. It's just a better way to make steel is what it comes down to. It's better than what they call the open hearth process. The open hearth process didn't have that super oxygenating. It's also, there's other things that happen. The first refrigerated railroad cars come out. Think about what that allows you to do. It allows you to ship meat around the country. Instead of on the hoof, you can actually ship product. You can ship produce around the country. So you do that before. You got much more freedom because of the railroad car. You also had this guy, Thomas Edison. I don't know if y'all know much about Thomas Edison. He was, when I was a kid, like in elementary school, I read a biography of him. He was like my hero for a little while. Edison is a pretty cool guy, kind of a jerk, but a pretty cool guy. Edison invented apparently everything at this time period. His nickname was the Wizard of Menlo Park. He had an invention factory in Menlo Park, New Jersey, where he hired the smartest people he could find to work for him. But the deal was, whatever they invented, whatever they came up with, he owned the patent for it. So we say Edison invented this stuff, but a lot of times it wasn't really Edison, it was the Edison factory, okay? But Edison is credited with inventing the incandescent light bulb. That changes the world. Now there were light bulbs before, but they didn't work well. His light bulb had a filament that continued to burn, okay? Very, very efficiently, very, in fact, the Edison light bulb would actually burn longer than modern light bulbs do. They now actually intentionally design light bulbs so they don't last a long time, so you don't have to buy more light bulbs, okay? But he invents this. How does that change the world? Well, suddenly you can work at night. Factories can operate 2 shifts. Before this, you could only work during the daytime. You could only work when there was sunlight. So you had 1 shift. Now you've got 2 shifts. You've doubled the amount of time you can work. And with people leaving the farms and coming to the factories, they needed the jobs. So that changes things. He developed the phonograph. The phonograph was like a primitive version of a record player, where you would record it. They had a wax cylinder they would record on. And Edison would have been very offended about the way we use his recording technology today with music. That's not what he wanted it for. He saw the phonograph as being more like a secretary, where you would sit down and you'd record your minutes or your messages, and you'd send it to somebody and they'd just play it back. Kind of like an answering machine or something. He invented the first motion pictures. They were simple. His movies were in these little penny arcades where you would go in and you put your penny in there and you could spin the. Guys, I'm sorry, my brain's not working real well. You can get in there, put your penny in there, and watch these short videos. They weren't really videos, short movies. So the first motion pictures were developed by this guy, Thomas Edison. Pretty cool guy. There's a picture of Edison holding his greatest invention, the light bulb. This is what the Edison bulb would have looked like. So you kind of get a feel for what was going on. very effective. By keeping the oxygen levels constant in there, they're able to have a filament that burns for a very long time. This is your early phonograph. You can see that cylinder at the top that would have it on it. Later on, it's going to be adopted for music, and you see that big horn there was the speaker. And he also came up with what he called the Ediphone or the Dictaphone, which was using the phonograph as a secretary, like I said, where you would dictate your messages and then you send it to your secretary and she would just listen to it and type it all up. Interesting guy. Here's his motion picture camera, a little bigger than the one we carry on our hips today, right?
Oh, yes.
The world just changed a lot. We also had this guy, Alexander Graham Bell. What you need to know about Bell is he invented the telephone. Now, again, there are other people that claim to invent the telephone, but he's the one that we can prove did it. At the very least, he invented one that worked well, okay? Alexander Graham Bell and the telephone back in 1876. That's going to change the world. In fact, he and Edison got together and they plotted to, they built a city outside of New Jersey where all the homes were connected to electricity for light and had phones connecting to each other. And it was this experimental community that they came up with, and it was a massive hit. They saw the future. This guy, George Westinghouse. George Westinghouse was in competition with Edison. Westinghouse came up with a system to get electricity to your home that he called alternating current. Well, this was the exact opposite of the system that Edison had, which was direct current. That's where AC/DC comes from, right? Alternating current, direct current. Well, they both work. But they both tried to have this to be the best system. Most people will tell you that the alternating current was better for you than the direct current was. But Edison was a better salesman than Westinghouse was. So what does Edison do? He wants to take this guy out, this guy Westinghouse, and his famous Westinghouse lamp. So he starts telling people that direct current is dangerous, and that if you allow DC into your home, your children will be shocked. Your house will be a house of death. And to prove this, Edison teamed up and created one of the most heinous devices ever. He created the electric chair as a system to execute people, and he intentionally used Westinghouse's direct current in the electric chair instead of alternating current. And he referred to it as being Westinghoused. So when you were killed by the electric chair, you were Westinghoused, is what they would say. It was his way of convincing you that it was dead. You have a question? Yeah, early bulbs. So the idea of this is amazing. One of the other things that Edison does is he travels around the country executing elephants for people to see, and he uses Westinghouse's direct current to do it. One of his first videos is of him Westinghousing an elephant, killing it. And it's disturbing, but it's all about shutting out Westinghouse, and it worked. It worked. He scared people so much that AC won out in the current wars, okay? I'm going to show you a quick video. If it plays, I hope it will. There's no sound on it, I don't think, or you don't need the sound if there is. And it's of the execution of an elephant through this. Now, I know it's kind of disturbing to say that, but so you can see how effective this was. If I can get it to come up. And I may not be able to. All right, here he goes. This elephant, by the way, had stampeded and killed a man, and this was literally his punishment for it was they were going to execute it. And it doesn't lock up.
Get him ready to be 40.
Oh, is
It's a circus elephant that had killed somebody. All right, I can hear somebody. Somebody hit the microphone. There we go.
They're not watching, like you're holding their hands.
Up to them.
Nope, I don't wanna watch it.
What?
Is he standing on it?
Yes.
Oh, man.
So it's kind of a low point in our history, but I want you to see this so you can understand exactly what was going on in history at this time. This is how Edison won the current wars, is by showing how dangerous direct current was. Now guys, alternating current is just as dangerous, okay? But they didn't call it being Edison's, they called it being Westinghouse. All right, so you kind of get a feel for it. By the way, what they don't show you in that picture is not only did they execute that elephant, but this is how weird society was. They brought the other elephants from the circus and made them watch the execution, because the thought was they would learn that this is what happens to you if you hurt somebody. Interesting idea. All right, so let's talk about the airplane for a minute. And we go back a little bit here, and I know the time periods don't line up great because we go back to 1903 a little bit, but as we bounce through here. You got these two guys, Orville and Wilbur Wright. These guys were actually bicycle mechanics. They built bicycles in Dayton, Ohio. But they had a dream of making a flying machine. They were not the first. A lot of people had tried to make flying machines before. And some people had even claimed to have done it successfully, although there is no proof. If you go to the Smithsonian Museum, they've got the plane from Kitty Hawk up there, but it no longer says, it used to say Orville and Wilbur Wright were the first manned flight. Today it says something to the effect of Orville and Wilbur Wright were the first people to be proven to be effectively, because there are other people that might have done it beforehand, okay? But December 7th, 1903, at a beach in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, they flew. And the flight was nothing that you would expect. It never got more than about 12 feet off the ground on that first flight. It went about 100 feet, but it was the first manned flight. Interestingly enough, that was 1903. By the end of World War I in 1917, we had planes flying from coast to coast, or from across the ocean, and delivering mail from the U.S. to Europe. That's how fast things happen, okay? It's amazing how fast technology happens. Can one of y'all get that for me, please? All right, so I'll show you some footage of this real quick so you can kind of see what it looked like.
Hey, for whatever reason, if this doesn't work right, you can only put it on speaker. I don't think it can use it.
Doesn't look much like the first plane.
Nobody don't want to sleep. And the hospital is there.
That's Orville and Wilbur. Part of the reason why they were able to get credit for this was because Edison had invented the motion picture camera by this point. It locked up for a minute. It'll play again in a second. Keeps doing that to me.
Is
So
that
I
an
don't
engine
know.
on it, or is that, were they pedaling?
They're pedaling. It's got a rubber band too.
Well, that one had an
Is there a
engine.
rubber
That one-
band?
Yeah, this is the second one. They ended up coming up with something.
And 2 4-horsepower engines.
Yeah, but originally it was pedaled.
Yeah, I don't think they really thought the pedals before.
We wouldn't call this much flight today, though, would we?
Hey, at that time, they didn't kill themselves. Hey,
So it doesn't work.
True. I thought
Not much more than a hang glider.
No landing gear.
No.
I didn't think of that.
Why'd they leave it? I guess it's just
You're right.
destroyed it.
Lay it down.
I bet you they just slowly started cutting them.
Tyler, let's build an airplane.
All right, so you kind of get the feel for that. They were not all that effective. Some of the attempts didn't work quite as well. Here's another attempt.
Looks like a bird.
Looks unbalanced.
It is.
Can you not tell?
Did not work very well. But somebody said it looks like a bird. Well, that was the model they were going for. That's why it looked like a bird. I mean, if birds can fly, so should you be able to. How about that one?
It looked like it was going into that building walking up there.
That would be one I would make.
Heck yeah.
There's Tyler's plane.
That was freaking smart though at that time period.
That was, I don't think that one was very smart.
That's a rocket.
Ever.
Is somebody in that?
Yes.
Oh my god.
No. Oh wow.
Wow, great drawing.
Ah.
That's something we were doing. Must pedal faster.
What the heck? Catch more air.
A lot of theory to that.
Oh. Did you see that one dude just didn't know?
I wonder if anybody actually died trying to do
Probably.
A lot of people died trying to fly, yes.
A lot of people died trying to do that parkour
What?
stuff, Joe.
This is my favorite one.
That's just hard.
it. I'm driving in food cars, you know, like.
Playing with that.
What the heck is that?
It's like planes.
They need feathers.
Wait.
That's what it is, they need feathers.
They need feathers.
I want to know how they made that move though.
Feathers, man.
This took so many years to make, and then they just all failed. I feel so bad.
The car was my favorite.
Yeah. So much for that one.
There's a lot of good ones here. Come on.
Yeah, I know.
I don't know that I could do better.
I could.
I know I couldn't. I could.
I could.
You have nothing to build off of those. You're building from.
That's true, because I know what to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, that was
All you
really
gotta do
good.
nowadays is Google how to fly.
Oh, dang it, that
What was the point of the
stupid
road
building wasn't in the way.
Yeah, I don't know.
They couldn't steer.
It
Well,
just
I
got
put
thrown
that
out.
guy to die. I mean, that was a really good plane.
All right, you get the gist of it. So, the plane was, it was a big leap forward. I used to have a man that would come to class years ago, doesn't really fit here, but it's a great story, that I knew in Jacksonville. And he was the second person, he was the backup pilot to Chuck Yeager. If you don't know who that is, Chuck Yeager was the first pilot to break the sound barrier. He was the guy that if Chuck Yeager got sick would have gotten to fly that day. He was the second man to break the sound barrier. And he told me, he was like in his 90s then. And when he first learned to fly, he learned to fly on Sopwith Camels, those little biplanes. And he said that the very first time he ever flew, he was in this biplane and he was going down, getting ready to take off, and he looked to his left, and there was a farmer on a tractor, and the tractor was going faster than his plane was. And the last time he flew, he broke the sound barrier. That was one man's life, okay? So that shows you just how effective and how fast this stuff happens, okay? All right, let's talk about the Model T Ford a little bit. Henry Ford is often credited with inventing the automobile. Ford did not invent the automobile. Henry Ford invented a way to efficiently make an automobile. The automobile has been around for a little while. Different people, some people say that Mercedes-Benz was the first. Oldsmobile claimed that the Olds was the first car. It just kind of depends. We know that Ford wasn't. But the Ford was the first one to be mass assembled on the assembly line. He also was the first person to work hard to pay his people a good wage. He did pay his people very, very well. Part of the reason was he wanted them to buy his cars. If he paid them well, they had money to buy his cars. The Model T Ford changed everything. At one point, the Rouge River plant was putting out one car every 10 seconds. That's how many assembly lines they had. And that does not mean they were making a car in 10 seconds. It was still taking a day to build a car. But they had so many lines going that every 10 seconds a Model T was coming off the line. The Model T was an amazing car. It went a rocketing 35 miles an hour, and it came in any color you wanted as long as that color was black. Okay, that was the Model T for you. But it was affordable. It was something everybody could afford. This is a picture of it, and if you kind of see the prices and sales, I know that's hard for y'all to see, but as prices came down, sales were going up. Okay, so they kept making it cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, and then selling more and more and more. This is a good business model, okay? And my computer is just running really, really slow, and I apologize for that.
It's okay, we forgive you.
You know, and I restarted it right before class started, so I'm not sure why it did.
That's probably fine.
Pull it back up.
Shut down.
Here.
All right, so there's an early ad for Ford, the 10 million Ford. That tells you just how many of these they were selling. It was a massive product. I know you don't have the sound on this, but I kind of want to show you. This is just a footage of the assembly line being developed. You really don't need the sound, and we probably won't watch it all, but I kind of want you to see a recreation of what it looked like as they built the first assembly lines. So when it first started, there'd be a crew of 4 men, and they would build a car from the bottom up. Ford said that wasn't effective. So he starts looking around, what can you do? So his next solution was, we'll move people from car to car. So you can see now, the person that's responsible for putting the radiator on, puts it on this car, and then goes to the next one. Still not real effective. So they look around, they do something called scientific management, where they time things and say, maybe it's more effective if we move the product instead of moving the person. And I'll show you in a second what that's going to look like. And this network is just running, so I think it's the computer, not the network at this point.
Yeah, this ain't real great. They can probably pump in 5 or 6 of them out a day at this point.
Now, here you go. So they just took this guy and they put a rope on it, and once they got the chassis, he pulled it from person to person. That's the first assembly line there. And they would put their, not going to be very effective, right? But it was faster. It was better than what we had before. So Ford is looking at this going, we still need something else. What else can we do? So they come up with another system, and we'll see it in a second, where they actually have, the assembly line where things come down the wheels like this. See on here that they've got it on rails, so you can just push it down. You don't have the guy with the rope anymore. That's the next step. Every step is just taking a little bit more time off.
You know what Henry Ford said, right?
Which one's that?
You can order any color you want.
As long as it's black.
As long as it's black.
Yep. That's when he wasn't making anti-Semitic comments, because he was a bit of a racist. All right, so you can see here they're just pushing the product down. This is a little more effective, and they're just going to slowly streamline. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but you can see here's the next example. They came up with rails to run things down, and by the end of this, they're able to put a car out very, very quickly. I'm going to go on because that video is going to keep locking up on me. If you start seeing how effective the patent system was, if you look at that, in 1790s there were only 276 patents given out. By the end of the period, we have over 200,000 patents coming out. So the patent system is going to be important. If you don't know what a patent is, it's where you own the intellectual property of something. And intellectual property is something that's protected. And the fact that we had a patent system in this country encouraged people to invent things. You couldn't have had a Thomas Edison without it. By the way, you see that number there? By the 1990s, there was over 1 million patents issued, okay? So we've got patents coming out all the time now. I hate this computer. All right, we're back to causes of rapid industrialization. There was a lot of people that were, we would call semi-skilled laborers. They had some skill, but not a lot. Guys, I am sorry about the way this computer is acting today. I don't know why it's doing it. Seems like it's always something. There was abundant capital available. This should pop up in just a second. That means there was a lot of money available. There was a lot of wealthy people. There was a lot of entrepreneurs out there. Guys like Andrew Carnegie, J. Pierpont Morgan, Cornelius Vanderbilt. These guys were out there, and they were very willing to experiment and try different things. Our population was growing dramatically. That increases the marketplace a lot. The government was willing to help with it, to stimulate the growth. The government invested a lot of money into new patents, something that was effective. Part of that was we had to build a war machine, and the role of a government is to defend yourself. So they poured a lot of money into defense. The last one is one that a lot of textbooks don't mention, but it's probably the most important one of all. The United States was in a unique position that we didn't have to buy our natural resources from anyone. We had the coal here. We had the iron here. We had the wood here. Everything you needed was available to us, and it was available to us abundantly. We didn't have to deal with other countries. That made it easier for us to industrialize. If you don't know what the word laissez-faire means, you seriously need to learn it. It's an incredibly important word. It's the ideology of the whole industrial age. It literally means let it be in French, but what we usually say it means is hands off. The government should stay out of the economy. The government should have very little to do with it. A laissez-faire economy is one that allows businessmen to make whatever business decisions they want to the best of their benefit. In a true laissez-faire economy, there would be very few laws restricting what the government or what businesses can do. And that was kind of the idea at this time. There's very little room for government in the market at this time period. If the government was involved, it was involved on the periphery by investing money in something that the government needed. Again, like defense contracts, building guns and stuff. There's also this theory called social Darwinism. Social Darwinism is put forth by this guy, Herbert Spencer. Herbert Spencer was an economist. He liked the idea of a laissez-faire government, but he also was a product of his own time period. And if you were alive at the turn of the 20th century, around 1900, Charles Darwin's ideas were everywhere. And excuse me, Charles Darwin, if you don't know who he is, you really need to know. You probably learned about him in a biology class at some point. But Darwin came up with the idea of the evolution of species. he was down in the Galapagos Islands and he looked and noticed how much different the birds were there from other places, particularly finches at first. And he logically said the reason they're different here is because they're separated from the rest of society and they evolved differently. And he built on the ideas of others. And he came up with the idea of survival of the fittest. He wrote a book called Origin of Species. Had a longer title than that, that's what we call it. But he said the reason why things evolve is because the most fit, the things that have the most healthiest system that will survive the longest will get to reproduce more, and they'll pass their genetics on, others won't. So over a period of time, you will evolve, you will change into something. And eventually, whatever's alive at the most modern period is the most evolved, best equipped version of that. It's a pretty smart idea when you think about it. And people bought Darwinism in a large way. By the way, Charles Darwin never said that man evolved from monkeys. That is a later idea. That was never his idea, not one time ever. Now, he did say that modern apes and humans might have had a similar ancestor at some point, but he never said you evolved from monkeys. But this idea, the notion of survival of the fittest, got placed on societies. And they started doing something called social Darwinism, which was this idea that the society that is the most advanced, that is the wealthiest, must somehow be a higher evolved society. It's a pretty racist idea. And they started looking around saying, well, the European style, the Western societies, England, France, the United States, they were the dominant countries in the world, therefore they must be a more evolved society. It's very easy to take that and go to the racist idea of the white man is more evolved than the black man, or the red man, or the brown man, or the yellow man, okay? It's very, very easy to do that. And that's what social Darwinism does. It can be very dangerous. In America, this guy, William Graham Sumner, adopts it. William Graham Sumner takes the idea of survival of the fittest so far. By the way, he's a hero to a lot of people in the libertarian movement. That the individual must have the absolute freedom to succeed or fail. He would have said there should be no government safety nets for anybody ever, for any reason. There also should be no safety nets for businesses. If you can succeed, you succeed on your own. If you cannot, then you should fail. I kind of like this guy, at least on that point. There are other things he said that were not so great. What else do we have in this new business culture? We started teaching what we call the Protestant work ethic. The idea that if man worked hard enough, he could lift himself up by his own bootstraps and you could be anything you want. You know, the American myth is that that we are all equal and everybody can be president. Now, I call it a myth, not because it's not true that anybody can be president, but because there's a lot that goes into it. The chances of you becoming president if you're born poor are very, very small. We've had one president do it. Okay? Ronald Reagan. I know everybody says Abraham Lincoln, but Abraham Lincoln was not born poor. He just sold a bill of goods to America that he was. Reagan was born very poor. Clinton was born poor, but he got into a wealthy family very quickly. His mother remarried. So you got this idea of a Protestant work ethic. And it was put forth in a series of books called Horatio Alger stories. You might have seen these when you were a kid. I can guarantee your grandparents read them. Horatio Alger stories was a series of over 100 novels that were mass-produced under the name of Horatio Alger. Now, it wasn't one person that wrote them all. It's kind of like the Nancy Drew Hardy Boys story. 1,000 people wrote them, but they all went by the same author's pen name. That's what Horatio Alger stories were. But in every one of these stories, they're about the man that works hard and succeeds somehow. And it taught this American ideal that we still have today. Okay? The idea of the self-made man. Our business also started changing the type of organization they had. The first system was called the pool. The pool was where businesses would join together and join their resources in order to buy products at a cheaper rate. Like if I owned a railroad company and you owned a railroad company, we would get together and make a deal that we were going to buy our coal together in order to keep our prices low. Well, that was eventually ruled to be illegal in 1887. So John D. Rockefeller comes up with something called the trust. And the trust is where companies would cooperate together, oftentimes under a corporation that owned them both, and they would cooperate to set prices. It would be like if Walmart and Target were owned by the same company, and both of them agreed not to undercut each other in prices. So we're all gonna compete. The first guy to do this was John D. Rockefeller with Standard Oil, and that's Rockefeller. And what he would do is he would cooperate with all the gas stations. He'd come into a town, buy like 2 or 3 gas stations, and then he'd cut the prices down very, very low and drive everybody else out of business. This trust would drive them out. And as soon as they were out of business, he'd jack the prices up because he was the only guy in town. Standard Oil, by the way, became Exxon eventually. He was the richest man in the world for a period of time. To give you an idea of how rich he was, the Standard Oil building in Washington, or in New York City was the tallest building in New York at one point. And he had a big vat of oil on the top of it that he kept burning all the time because he wanted immigrants when they come to New York to see the Standard Oil logo before they saw the Statue of Liberty. Okay? That's how rich this guy was. And he got his hands in everything. This is an editorial cartoon from the time period about Standard Oil. And I don't know if y'all can see that very well, but that's like an oil tank there. It says Standard Oil on the top, but it's got a octopus, and he's reaching out, and you see he's got the Capitol, and he's got the White House, and he's got some politicians. What the artist is trying to say is this Standard Oil is like an octopus that's got its hands in all the government stuff, and it's taking advantage, swallowing up everything.
Soros.
Sort of what?
Soros.
A lot like George Soros. Yeah, that'd be a good comparison. I think you could put Microsoft on there too, pretty easy, or Apple. So, all right. How else do these trusts organize? They can organize as either horizontal integration or vertical integration. This is easy to understand whether you realize it or not. Think about it. Horizon. Horizontal is side by side. When you look at the horizon, it's flat, right? So horizontal integration is where you own all the businesses that produce the same product. So if you owned every gas station in town, that would be a trust that was horizontally integrated, okay? The other way you can do it is through what we call vertical integration. And U.S. Steel did this. This is where, instead of owning all of the steel companies, you would own the steel refinery, you would own the mine where the iron was dug, you would own the mine where the coal that was used to fire the iron was dug, you would own every product that was used to make it. That's vertical integration. Do you understand the difference here?
Yeah.
Okay. Both are ways of keeping the price down. You can use both. And here's a picture diagram here. So you can kind of see horizontal, you own all the same product. Vertical, they're lined up north to south. Let's stop there for the day, and we will pick up next time. Do not forget that you have to do the quizzes. Our test is 1 week from today. 1 week from today. You've got the quizzes, you've got the study guide. You can do the quizzes as many times as you want. You get the highest grade you have. So if you do it, make sure you put your name, at least first initial and last name, so I know who's taking it, okay? Good luck, and I will see y'all on Wednesday. Yes?
When is the quizzes due?
The quizzes is open through next Friday, I think. So you know, there's not as big of a hurry, but the quiz is going to help you get ready for your test. Good question.
love my new koozie. When you put it on this Aquafina water bottle, it looks like she has curves.
The new koozie?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Looks like she has curves.